So the U.S. has carried out airstrikes in Iraq against a militia, well, both in Iraq and Syria, but mainly, this is an Iraqi militia largely. They are a part of the Popular Mobilization Units, which is sort of a confederation of Iraqi militias that are pretty closely aligned with the Iraqi government. I believe this one is called Kataib Hezbollah. I'm not sure how to pronounce that first word, but I think that's correct. And so this is not the Hezbollah group from Lebanon, but I think they have a similar logo, so they probably are trying to hearken to that Hezbollah. And of course, this is also a Shiite group, so they have that in common. And I guess Kataib Hezbollah operates both in Syria and Iraq, but of course, in Iraq, they're part of the Popular Mobilization Units, which are all Shiite militias. They had the PMU was kind of the tip of the spear when it came to the Iraqi government's efforts to retake the country from ISIS. They worked very closely, with the United States, because the United States was also trying to take out ISIS in Iraq. The PMU kind of had to fill the vacuum where a lot of the regular Iraqi troops deserted at that time. And so it's interesting to see the U.S. now attacking one of the PMU's groups. Their reasoning for this is that they apparently blame this particular militia for an attack on a base near Kirkuk, but this is not an American base. This, is an Iraqi government military base, which happened to have some Americans there, and there were some rockets fired at the base, which were, I guess they sustained them. They weren't able to intercept them or anything, and there were a few Americans injured and one American killed. Now, the American that was killed was a contractor, not a soldier. But nevertheless, the U.S. took this seriously, and they said, well, if an American's killed, we have to retaliate in some way. And so they found and said, well, Kataib Hezbollah, we're going to blame them, without citing any evidence. And just said, well, this is who must have done it. They have Hezbollah in their name, which means, well, they're basically Iran. And so we're going to spin this as Iran attacked America, and here we are fighting back. And so this is a part of the overall narrative of, Iranian aggression and, blah, blah, blah. Look, Iran is trying to take over the Middle East. Look, they're setting up bases everywhere. There's an Iranian hiding behind every rock. And, when the time comes, the rock will shout out to the good American and say, oh, good American, come, please. There's an Iranian hiding behind me. Come kill him. And so in this case, the reason why they're trying to spin it this way is because, well, it doesn't really make much sense for why would the U.S. be bombing a militia, which is basically Iraqi government, Iraqi government troops. They are very closely aligned with the Iraqi government. They support the parties that make up the governing coalition of Iraq, because the Shiites are in control there. And so while these guys aren't regular troops, what they are basically armed citizens, because in Iraq, I believe every male head of household by law is required to keep a rifle. And so, there's a lot, you have all these armed citizens, and they form, militias in their local areas, and that's what these guys are. And so it's a much easier story to spin in America and to feed to the American people that, oh, well, we're just bombing these Iranians. This bad Iranian, and so that's how CNN, for example, because I was reading this story on antiwar.com, because that's a pretty good source. They post up pretty much everything. They kind of like, they're sort of like, I use them kind of like Drudge for foreign policy news, because they just, they post links to stories about things that have been going on with all the various wars that are going on around the world. They also have an opinion section, but I don't really read that. And it was just funny how they have their little synopsis of, of what happened, about how, you have this PMU group, and, they explain, I already knew the PMU is very closely aligned with the Iraqi government. Then they link to a CNN story, which I guess they were using as a source. And it's just so funny to read the CNN story and how completely ass-backwards it is. Because the CNN came in, and they're like, oh, yeah, and the U.S., well, they were attacked by, just saying everything as a matter of fact, because the Pentagon spokesman told them this. Yeah. The base in Kirkuk, that was attacked by some Iranian-backed militia, and so the U.S. retaliated against that Iranian-backed militia, and now they've suppressed this Iranian aggression. And seeing, the contrast between sort of an honest representation of the story and what, most people are going to read if they hear anything about this at all in the mainstream media, it really shows you how, people can get whipped up into the war fervor. I mean, Americans are constantly propagandized with stuff like this. And the most dangerous part of all this is that the way that CNN worded the story, it was factual, but it wasn't truthful. So you could say, oh, well, maybe, Iranian-backed, it might be, to some extent, because Iran is pretty much affiliated with all the Shiites in the Middle East. Iran is affiliated with the Iraqi government. So to the extent that Iran is backing the Iraqi government, they're also, I'm sure, backing these, Iraqi militias. But when you focus on only that aspect of it, it obscures the fact that this is an Iraqi militia. And so when you make this all about Iran instead of being about Iraq, well then it becomes a lot easier to believe the story that these guys are responsible for attacking this base, because you're like, oh, well, they're Americans at this base and these are Iranians, so they're attacking this installation, killing Americans. That makes perfect sense. They probably did it. Well, if you look at this through the correct lens of that these are Iraqi PMU militiamen affiliated with the government, it doesn't make any sense that they would attack the base in Kirkuk, because that's an Iraqi government base. It's not a U.S. military base. And so when you add in that the U.S. didn't provide any evidence as to why this is true, I really have no reason to believe it, because as I said, these are their allies. Why would these Iraqis attack their own base? They're not rebelling against the Iraqi government. They're affiliated with the Iraqi government. These are pro-government militias. Why would they attack their own guys? I mean, the Iraqi military it's their people. And yes, there happen to be some Americans there, but I'm sure there are many more Iraqis. And so it looks to me like these folks, this Kataib Hezbollah group, was just scapegoated. I don't really see why they would have done this, or of course the U.S. refuses in all cases to provide any evidence that anyone that they accuse of doing anything did anything. Just like with the weapons of mass destruction, going all the way back to that in Iraq. We never got any evidence. All we get are sources say. That's all that we ever get. And now sources say that an Iraqi government militia attacked an Iraqi government military base. And there's no reason to take their word for it. I mean, these people have lost all credibility. I mean, maybe back in 2003, I'm sure probably I would have been, well, I was pretty young back then, but had I been, of normal free-thinking age of adulthood, I probably would have been, too trusting in whatever the government said, because we hadn't been lied to so much in my lifetime then. But by now, we've been lied to constantly over the last 20 years. As long as I've been aware of anything in the world, the U.S. government has been lying to us, and they've continually just fed voters dumb excuses for their wars. So if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.